everyone. I'm Sarah Christensen from When Sages View Astrology. Thank you for joining me on my Bridgerton series that I'm doing a playlist for exploring the astrology of Nicola Coughlan and Luke Newton, the co-leads of season 3. Since we do have their rising signs, we're going to take a look today at their synastry. I know a lot of people have been waiting for the synastry, and so we're going to dive into that in this one. And I wanted to cover a lot about them as individuals before we went into the synastry, because I think that's important to consider what each individual has before we look at the synastry of two individuals together. Now, we do not have exact birth times for either. We do have rising signs. Luke's is a little bit in question. There could be a slim chance that he is a Virgo rising, so that could change up the houses, but I'm going to do it from Nicola's chart being the base and then Luke's connected to hers, and then I'm going to flip it to see Luke's as the base core and then Nicola and how that feeds in, because you want to look at both perspectives of what each individual is getting from the other individual in that connection and how that illuminates them, and then how we might observe that. So I hope you enjoy an exploration of their synastry. If you have any questions, insights, comments, I always appreciate your comments. Down below you'll see additional videos from this Bridgerton series. I'm not sure how many that will come out of this creative spark, and so I'm just going to be creating until I feel like, yep, I've done enough on that. So I have no idea how many. I could just kind of go with the inspiration until it feels like, yeah, I covered all the things I want to cover. And that could go through the whole summer. I don't know. At sometime in the future, this will unhitch. So I'm still exploring because I'm very interested in Eros and Psyche and that interplay of how magnified these co-stars, these co-leads of Bridgerton really picked up in the collective and the fandom as they had been watching them through the years, and how that has matured up to this point. But there is kind of like a little bit more of, I don't know, maybe imagination or hopefulness of, is there a possibility of a real connection that goes beyond the characters? That's to be determined. We don't know where their friendship, their great friendship will go. That's up to them. I do leave it at that. But I am curious to see the astrology at play, because who knows, maybe in 5 years or 2 years, I'll pick up more on this because of some other things that transpire, and we'll take a look at it and allow for the free will of the individuals to flow as it will. So that's super important, and I want to acknowledge that. But mostly, let's enjoy the astrology. If you have questions on the astrology, please ask your questions below in the comments or on the community page where you feel comfortable in sharing, or you can DM me as well through my email. I think my email address is on my channel. I think you know how to find that, but I'll make sure you can find it. It is definitely, there's a contact detail on my website as well. So either way, but if you are interested in your own astrology, that's a point that I try to get at here, is if you are interested for your own astrology insights, you can contact me and book a reading. That's, part of the thing here. All right, so let's get going and dive into the synastry of Nicola Coughlan and Luke Newton. Let's go. All right, we're going to start on the synastry chart for Nicola Coughlan and Luke Newton. So we are looking at their chart here, and I'm going to follow along with some highlights so you can kind of see what I'm looking at. So in the center is Nicola's chart. We have that as Aquarius rising for Nicola, and that has her natal chart as it's kind of across the houses and the planets where they are when she was born. Of course, this is a whole sign house system, kind of what traditional astrology uses. And even though I'm primarily an evolutionary astrologer, I care about the soul evolution when I'm doing astrology and looking at it from that perspective most often. But I trained in 2 disciplines to give me more information. Okay, and then on the outside, we have Luke's chart from what we understand. And of course, we have his ascendant in Leo, so that's over here. And then we have his moon in Cancer, and that's here. And so then we can see all his planets on the outside, how they connect with her chart. So it's very significant of having their ascendants in opposing signs. That's a huge thing with the mirroring perspective. But even if he's a Virgo rising and a moon in Leo, that mirroring could still be really powerful because of the moon being in Leo reflecting her her, reflecting back through her, that experience. So then that would put that moon up there. But we're going to go from this perspective, okay, based on what we know. So I look at what planets and things line up pretty dynamically. And we have this part. I'm not sure if that's exactly his midheaven, but that's pretty important. This section of the chart is also very powerful because of the total solar eclipse. So 18 degrees, or 19 degrees. So that's about right there. And how that would be within their two charts. So I always kind of take a look at that, right? Because the total solar eclipse, I think in April 8th of 2024 was a very important moment for both of them, especially for Luke and his progressed Venus. And we discussed that already. Here is also a really significant connection. Let me go back on that. That's all of these. This is all kind of together here. I kind of slice that down like that and then grab that. Maybe even the 14 of the Cupido, but I'm not gonna. And then maybe her midheaven is there. But it's mainly that Venus, okay? Because that Venus trines his own Venus. So I want to just point that out. The Venus is very important. And this is the Venus up here. So these are in the same element, fire and fire. What else do I want to point out? Oh yeah, he has this stellium piece of Capricorn. It's kind of like includes Vesta and even a lot of fortune on his chart to her Juno, to her Mercury, and to her Sun, and even Cupido. So there's this huge kind of grouping here. So there's quite the dynamic going on. Okay, what else? Oh yeah, this is a really important part because the Jupiter co-rules Pisces, definitely the ruler from a traditional standpoint of Pisces. So this point in the chart for Nicola is sensitive. And what's interesting is Luke Newton's progressed Sun and Mercury are sitting right on her Jupiter. So that point is actually sensitive as well. So I kind of want to make note of that because of the progress chart. This is their natal to the natal, but I also keep in mind the timing in life when someone connects with somebody really significant. Now this is just natal to natal, but I'm also kind of bringing in a little bit of detail that we've already picked up on from, what's been transpiring in 2024 as it pertains to their progress charts, and even the transits of really big transits have been the total solar eclipse. I haven't even looked at the lunar eclipse. I've only looked at the solar eclipse, and also the conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus that was in Taurus, which is definitely happening at this section of her chart and this part of his chart. So it's activating that piece. But it was such a big piece of the release of season 3. So now they did a lot of the work before 2024. 2021, they were probably told that they got that their season was next. 22 and 23 is when they were actually getting either their lines and prepared for those co-lead scenarios that they would be acting out. So, but it's more kind of like from the natal perspective, it's just kind of like the natal potential of what is significant to these two individuals. And it's definitely the impact of their mirroring and what can come from that. First, that sparks as maybe a first initial, like this person, I know this person is going to be significant in my life just because of how it's outlined for them. They're the co-leads. They already know that, right? So there's like a contractual agreement that comes into play for them. They had to win the parts and whatnot. But from what I know, they didn't test for them to have chemistry. They just got the roles. So that was Shonda Rhimes' team figuring out that, that's my Penelope and that's my Colin, right? Like just knowing that from their, what they presented themselves in their auditions. So I think that's pretty interesting, right? Where I think other co-leads in Bridgerton did have the chemistry test. So that's kind of interesting, right? That timing is also kind of interesting of how they jumped from 4 to 3, the 4th book into the 3rd season. So, and how they translated that. Okay, so as an evolutionary astrologer, I look at the nodes of the moon as really important, as kind of really big themes. So for Nicola, we see Libra is a south node detail in her chart. And I think it's important to point that out, that she is coming forward in this life to look at relationships, herself in relationships, and to learn something new, because she's trying to evolve something new, because her Venus in Sagittarius has it has a little bit of a wildness to it, and Venus in Sag was in her chart very much in the house of allies and friends and that detail, but in Sagittarius it has a little bit more of the wild child part of it. And so she's learning about relationships and what she will want to evolve something around, like how she expresses her Sagittarius energy in relationships. That Venus in Sag it's almost like needs to have a very dynamic relationship that can allow her to be free and not see the boundaries too hard or felt too harshly, so she can express her authentic self. There's something very powerful about a Venus in Sag, and that's coming from a Venus in Sag individual. No, I know that one really well. The Venus is the ruler of the South Node. It's not sitting on the South Node, so it's not like she hasn't progressed from that. I mean, it's sextile signs, so the two can see each other, but she's leaning into the fire energy in this life. She is leaning into the authentic voice, being uniquely herself, and having to take a lot of courage sometimes to actually push that part of herself out forward. And she has a lot going on in her 12th house with all the Capricorn. So in the unconscious mind part of her, there are memories and that unconscious part of self that it identifies itself as more stoic, right? So that to me is not surprising, that there is kind of the boundaries and expectations and status, and you work to get to earn the thing, and you create the achievements and all those things. That's very Capricorn, and you live by the rules of the society. That's kind of the rigid, box that's there in the unconscious mind. But in this expression, this life, she's learning about Aquarian rising energy, which is you break out of that, you break free to be your individual self. And what's so funny is I think in actually her Dairy Girls character, there's a line that she drops that's something about being an individual. I'm not going to be the only individual, and she changes her coat because they were all going to do something very unique against maybe their uniforms or something. I haven't completely nailed that line. I don't know, remember it exactly, but I do remember that scene, and it's very funny how it's played. But what's interesting is to pick up on these little tiny things that are in an actor's things that they play, and then what's going on kind of like in the broader tapestry of their life from a soul perspective that they're trying to like wiggle from and break free for their own authentic voice this life. So I see that in Nicola, and even how she has, taken on the understanding herself from, learning a lot from drag, and how she would create an image for herself to step into and play that part bravely and boldly and all of that. And then after the fact, look back and say, I did it. But at the same time, I was scared, shitless to do the thing that I was, set myself up to do. So there's something about that having such an Aquarian edge to it as well. So she's learning so much about the Aquarian energy as it's the ascendant, right? So Saturn is a very, very important planet, but again, in her chart, I'm going to wipe away some of these pink lines so we can see all the planets again. I'll go by these one by one, but here's the Saturn in her chart, and look, Luke Newton's North Node, which is a very, very important point. The North Node is where we're evolving towards. It's interesting that it's so explosive with her two kind of planets right there. You have Saturn at 16 Sag, and Uranus at 24 Sag. So Uranus being there is showing just this breakthrough kind of energy that she will display in the endeavors that she does, milestone by milestone, the things she does by doing it again and again through discipline and devotion. Saturn is a planet that you work it, you do the discipline, you do the thing. And it can be hard sometimes because we go through periods of the things aren't coming together, that as I've worked so hard and it's not being realized yet, but it was like a slow burn for her, but eventually it would break open really in a magnificent way. But that's all kind of this combination in her chart. So, I mean, that Saturn conjunct by about, 16 to 24, that's about 8 degrees, but that's still relevant enough for the impactfulness of a Uranus. But it's kind of like in the timing when that will break open, right? So I think that's important. We can look at some other things, but I like solar arcs, and we've definitely looked into some progressions already, but there are other timing techniques to look at for timing. But Luke Newton is leaning in to understand something about her own way of going about it. and her, but he has his own Saturn. So his own Saturn is Aquarius, and he has all the Aquarian energy that she's learning about. So there's something about them coming together, that they're teaching each other kind of things that are familiar for one. So one has a deeper understanding of it kind of in their bones than the other one. And so he's leaning into that knowledge about her on the world stage in a big way, being an individual. He's learning that from her. And also that they recognize there's a recognition in each other about self and other, I think is going on also, that when you can just look across the room and just eye to eye and have like a kind of like a silent communication, but just a knowing that, yeah, we need to get out of here. We need time out because we need to recharge our batteries. That's the connection that could have, just by having time. Because Luke is the kind of person who needs the time to register more about that kind of knowing, I think, where she is more quick-witted and fast in her communication and processing of information. That's why you see her talking more and sharing more in the interviews, because she can work with that information faster and pick up on things faster that may be coming from the questioning, where he takes a little bit more time to process. And we've all seen that. That's not a surprise. And we all have friends, and we may have family members who have that similar kind of slower processing that we recognize in Luke. And someone who is an actor who's like playing a part, they have worked out their lines. They have figured out the expressions that they want to bring forward to kind of really nail the part that they're playing. And so he has time to go over things again and again when he's creating the character for us to all connect with. And that's his art. That's his devotion to it. That's, he has an incredible work ethic with all that Aquarian energy that he has in the Sun and in Saturn and in Mercury. And you square that with Pluto, that's really dynamic. Okay, continuing on from what each is giving each other. So the Aquarian energy is from Luke. All that from his Sun in the first house for her is kind of supporting her in that endeavor to express more, to come forward more. And so in that interplay between their characters of Penelope and Colin and Penelope, we get that inner exchange of, she wasn't brave enough in many regards to come out, like to own that part of herself, that Lady Whistletown, until that connection was made with the character, with Colin. And he also was unsure of his purpose. Like she had more of like insights into the purpose from that scene where I think they're at a wedding that is stalled or something, and they're outside talking, and Penelope goes into her, my purpose is, and then she goes into and he's having a little moment of recognizing that, oh, there's more to her than I thought. That good conversation that they had in that part of season 2. And that kind of vision, purpose is Sag, and that is what she brings to the table. So not only does she bring it in her character, and like I said, oftentimes characters that they are portraying on the screen is really mapping into their own astrology and how they can bring it out. And it's a way to express parts of their chart, and it's actually just something then that we get to engage in. So we get to engage with their art, and so that can make it really powerful. When we have co-stars that have this kind of connection in their charts, it really does have an explosive combination. Now, then you add that into the combination of like Shonda Rhimes and Netflix, or Julia Quinn, Shonda Rhimes and Netflix, you get another layer. Go into that later. But these two have really been amazing in what I'm seeing in the pickup of the Psyche Eros that was in their storyline. And then that has picked up, I just think, the passion that's continuing to, it has oxygen. It's still going. And so I'm just curious to, like, towards the end of the summer, how those numbers will continue to show up in, where does it stack rank in the all-time, most streamed shows, right? So that's interesting. Okay. Another thing in their Synastry chart, I've covered, like, his Aquarius is bringing all that energy to her first house. So it's almost like a beautiful dance partner, or a beautiful partner that gives the light to that partner. So it's like Luke as Colin gives it to Penelope, but Luke also by being present, just by being present, and his presence of how he is, and their comfort in the promo tour shows a way that they would interplay, have like train of thought that might got caught up in a moment of interviews, multiple interviews in a day, like how they would have so much innuendo going on. That's like that exchange going on, and then it's just gonna keeps building and building, and then they're and then they're kind of surprised, maybe not surprised by themselves going in that direction again and again of how they play off of each other. So Luke brings a lot of Aquarian energy that she's kind of experiencing, and then how that gets picked up in the mirroring. So that sun in her first house is one of the most significant things I can think of from a synastry part, outside of the connection with the Venus of his chart and the Mars of her chart, because absolutely that's a connection, right? But what's interesting is that it's so important to the mirroring. So there's a mirroring of the masculine and the feminine, but it's in the masculine sign of Aries, and for the conjunction of his Venus to her Mars. And so I think that's really important as it relates to this south node. So because the Venus is the ruler, and the Venus has a trine, so there's this awareness between her feminine and the masculine part of like what Aries represents. And so there's like what you go get, so much of the theme of the show, but also I think what we witness is instincts, like the instinctual nature that kind of emerges on Luke's face when that's subtle. And I don't think all of it is a show. I think some of it is he can't avoid it is just who he is and how his real feelings. And that's why people are like, wait a minute, that's too real. I don't think you can act out everything over 6 months in every single promo thing. I think you can act it out a little bit, but you would have to already have like the natural chemistry that's going on between the two people to actually make that feel so real and have people question it so much. I think that's the key. But there is still the relationship scenario that's going on here between the Jupiter of his chart and the south node of her chart. There's like this balance in the relationship for Luke. What I know about Luke's Jupiter is it's going to be retrograde his whole life. It's not going to by progression move to a station and then go direct in his progress chart. So that tells me there's an inner awareness around Jupiterian things for him. So I look at where that part of his chart is now. If we have Leo rising for sure for him, that would put the Leo, it's over here. So that's that would be his 5th house of creativity. So it's like that inner world pull of Jupiter that he has to pull out in order to even portray the character he's portraying. However, I think when you have a Jupiter like pulling on your north node like that it's more than just the inner world, because the inner world will eventually move towards an outward expression. But the growth part, like what will expand, he's expanding his awareness through his connection with things, right? So his own passions, his own desires, which is 5th house stuff, like those creative projects are his babies. And one day maybe they are real babies, but in the show, spoiler alert, there's more at the end of there. But I think it's more about the Jupiter is expanding something for him to realize about his purpose. That 5th house of creativity with Sag there is about him figuring out there's so much more to me. Like if he was to dive into his own astrology, his Jupiter would be like, oh, through the relationships I have, I will understand my purpose and then who I am. But it's also what I want to create, how I want to be creative. How do I go through such a detailed precision of emotional expression that will then show up, right? So there's so much to the dynamic of that he is working with to even understand himself, right? Because his sun has to have that expression with someone else, especially if his ascendant is Leo. The Leo sun on the opposite side is like he can only get it through that loop, whether it be a co-lead like Nicola, but definitely Nicola, how it pulls out so dynamically. And the volume of interest is amazing to the degree that it's beyond the other leads in ways that I can't even articulate in this moment. But I think it's important that, we don't have the birth times. I've looked for season 2 and season 1. I don't have times of birth on any of the other ones yet. So I'm trying to think of another way that I could maybe look at their charts, but right now I don't have that. So I'm trying to backtrack and see if I can rectify their charts, which is very challenging without even an idea of the birth time because you have 24 hours to deal with on a day. But I think with Luke, with that Jupiter in retrograde, he's learning so much about his inner self. And so even in the show, he goes off on his travels, which is a very Jupiterian kind of thing, is to go off and travels and meet new people and make friends that way. But he's going off and he's learning about himself. And even it's so interesting how that pulls out on that thread in the show, I think in season 2. But it's amazing that it's connecting. His learning is connected to Nicola in such an expensive way. So other projects, how that may pull out. I mean, I really wonder what other projects might they do that could continue that learning, or is it just through Bridgerton, we get just the couple seasons that they do, and that's all we have visibility to, and then we don't see them connect in co-starring roles anymore. That could happen, right? We might not see them on the screen together, and I think that would be a shame because they're so dynamic, right? I would love to see them outside of a Bridgerton type scenario and see what they would create, what parts could be created that would pick up the other themes and things that both they get for themselves, and that would be a great project, but also how that would translate into, audiences and what they pick up on. Because when you get to co-stars, these co-leads get this much fascination and interest and passion and being enchanted by them, it picks up that people will go and follow them to the other projects that they do. And, that's kind of what happens. So there's definitely kind of this, she's got a view of how to create the vision. He's learning from that. He's learning about that relationship tie, himself in relationship to another person. When Nicola's involved and as a co-lead, it kind of helps him understand that creation. And together they created something really huge, really magnificent, and almost otherly world, I think, with the Eros and Psyche so tied in. So there's that. When we're dealing with the unconscious mind, now unconscious mind means it is the place in ourselves that we store long-term stuff that we forget about in the day-to-day living, but it's also our connection to the depth of the unconscious mind. The depth of the unconscious mind not only is, it's while we're alive, we're connected to everything else. And so when you're a powerful medium or psychic or clairvoyant, clairaudient, whatever, you have a strong connection to in 12th house, 8th house, and 6th house. These houses tend to have, when you have a lot of planets in there, you're in service to something bigger, or you're in service to the local public in some way. For example, if you have a sun in the 12th house, you might, and you're not psychic or you're not empath or compassionate, like in that regard, but maybe you are compassionate, but you're not, walking the path in terms of being a healer of any sorts. You're working just with the public in a very, public agency, public health kind of way, and you're like the supervisor or something. There, if you have the sun in the 12th house, but sun in the 12th house that has, the desire to be creative is pulling on something of the unconscious mind, and it's getting activated to illuminate the life, because that's, it's pulling out of the 12th house in a way, but with the combination of who are you co-starring with, what planets are kind of touching that and bringing it out, right? So the sun in Nicola's chart being in the 12th house behind the ascendant is important because it's highlighting that she is doing something with the collective in a big way without maybe her even recognizing that, right? But it's also the awareness as an astrologer that sun for Nicola will go down by progression. It will move into Aquarius over the course of her life. And so in the progressed charts, we can see where the progressed sun is in her chart, okay? And how that will map into his chart. So we'll see that progressed sun and how it moves and connects up with his progressed sun, or his sun and her progressed sun. Because I believe it when they first met, her sun progressed to meeting up with his sun, which was really huge in 2019. So I'll go back on that, but I do believe you can just do it because it's 1 degree per year for the sun. All the other planets have different time movements, but the sun is easier to calculate because it's all based on the sun. So you can go 18 to 18 is 30. So maybe that's not exactly, it is to his Saturn. Is that right? Oh, we need to go back on that. So that it is 18 to 18 is 30. 31 would be 17, 32 would be 18. So yeah, it hits the midpoint in between the two. So it kind of has an importance between the Sun and the Saturn. If I believe that, didn't she start Bridgerton at age 32, or was it 31? I think it was 32. Yeah, because that was 2019, July when they met. I think that is true. So, because she was born in 1987. So what's significant is that it's kind of like that touch point of, I remember in the other video that I shared on one of them, Nicholas and Luke, I always say that backwards. Nicola and Luke both have Saturn as a very important planet because their careers have kind of a karmic moment of breaking open after a very Saturn grief moment. So right before Nicola got her role in Dairy Girls, her father died, I think 5 days before or something. She said in an interview before. So we don't have the exact date. We just have, like, she had mentioned in an interview that 5 days before she landed the gig for Dairy Girls, her father had passed away. And then right as season 1 of Bridgerton was being released, Christmas Day 2020, everybody gathered, Luke Newton's family gathered. And in that, there's a storyline that happened for him where his father passed away from COVID the day after his birthday when he was turning 28 in 2021. That was February. Yeah. So February of 2021. So it's important to kind of, there's a couple of things that I think are important. The Saturn is very important for both of them. So I kind of keep that in mind, how important Saturn is and what Saturn means from her chart to his North Node. There's something of learning about purpose, vision, having the vision, and having allies. Is it not true that we are seeing the importance of how Nicola, just in how she presents herself? You can definitely see the businesswoman part of Nicola in how she presents herself online, because she is online. She understands what is going on in the collective of the fandom and those who are in the fans, what's being in the memes and all of that, more than any of her co-stars. She is really tuned into that. And because she's tuned into that, she is better at navigating how to present herself once that picked up. Luke doesn't have that same. He's more of the, somebody who went into theater, then went into the TV and the the potential, like Netflix and these kind of the movies, TV and movie presence, the shows. So that's his beginnings, but I think it adds to his element of how expressive he could be, because he's had also the tie with music and how that helps him express. So there is him gaining wisdom about, how important it is to have good allies, how important it is that is a part of your strategy, and how important that is for continuing the vision that you have for yourself. Like, he's probably learning all of that. His South Node is down here in Gemini. So his past is connected more into his Mercury, and his Mercury is in Aquarius. So he has the knowledge, maybe the fears of how it's been to be an individual, being in the public eye, and the fears related to that. And I think it's also kind of the way he takes time to process something, and then someone with a fixed sign like that Mercury, it picks up the information, but it's a slower pickup, and it's more but it is very cerebral. And a Mercury with Aquarius is so close to Saturn, has that there's a wisdom to it, but it takes time to it takes time to mature into it. When you have a Saturn and with a personal planet next to it, there's a maturity that comes into the window of when will that really be visible as was intended, meaning it was in the seed of potential. Luke Newton's soul had that potential, and it would take time to bake it in over time of lived life and maturity. So in Aquarius, Mercury takes time to process all the things it's experiencing. It's very much the meme where it's like got the spinning kind of dial of, trying to think. It's loading. That's definitely the case here, right? But he has a past life, like bring forward, incarnate this life of that Mercury being square to his Pluto. Now he's got the Pluto sitting in her 10th house of career. So he brings in this, they have that whole sexiness going on with that. But it's also the depth of the connection. It's the depth of the bond. Okay. But he has the Mercury trying to process the thing that goes beyond the script. Okay. The Mercury also is trine to that south node. So there is something of he's bringing back something that he's ready to experience more. It's like a soul evolves things over maybe multiple lives, and you can kind of put them in a phase of things of being more mature each life as they get closer to understanding something big for them, depending on the degree of what they're learning in that experience. So that whole nodal structure, the south node, his north node in Sagittarius, and his south node in Gemini, is about the difference between you have the facts and then you have the vision or philosophy. And facts are different. They're just detail, 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 detail. There's a different kind of learning with facts and factual data versus having a vision, and how then all of the things come together for a vision or purpose or higher learning. That's Sag. So he's very comfortable with like, this is the script. I can do all the things, but there's so much more than by having like the full philosophy on something, the whole vision, purpose, easily spoken. So him even in the show trying to find his purpose, like what's my purpose? Not only in his experience, but it's also in Benedict's storyline. And so we'll probably see some kind of similarities, maybe even in Luke Thompson's charts, right? So Nicola having the Sagittarius Saturn, but having Uranus touch it at an 8-degree orb, there is something to be said about she had to go through a process herself. She went through a lot to get her career to where it is. So she had to have her own way of holding a vision to get to where she is, landing the parts and these kinds of things. But there is also, I think, in this understanding and awareness that there are sometimes things lifting us that we can't quite explain when we actually get the part, right? Or yes, you do the hard work, but sometimes people call it luck, and they're so humbled to be in something and it was all luck. Yeah, that you could argue that, but to me, it's like the combination of things that allow the archetypal play to actually breathe. It kind of lines up. It's the only reason we could even read astrology, right? So sure, you can say luck. I call it divine timing for something to come together. Yeah, that it's the perfect moment for that thing to express itself, because all the things just line up for it to and there's divine timing of amazing things, and then there's divine timing of things that are tragic as well. I mean, timing is so powerful. So I think having that amount of Sagittarian energy, and Jupiter is exalted in Nicola's chart. So she is such a cornerstone for the whole thing to breathe the way it, and the lineup of when their season dropped. That moment that dropped was very important. So again, timing and the connection with, having the, what I call you have the road, or the, it's kind of like the airplane taking off. You have to have enough runway. She had to have, the runway of season 1, season 2, and then all the changes that were made to create season 3, that all that was part of it to then have liftoff. So the same thing with the individuals in their experiences have kind of the same thing. Some will lift off faster out of something so once they've hit the threshold, like Nicola is peaking, so we can see her picking up after this season 3 has completed. We actually see her picking up other projects. We already see she had multiple projects going at the same time. We see the pickup are taking place because she's booked and has another, I think it's the magic tree or something, or magical something that she's already working on this summer. So, and what we have of Luke Newton he's definitely in season 4, and that's going to be announced. I think they're going to start filming in September or something. But does all that we've seen is more beauty related stuff, which is kind of like that Psyche and Eros, Psyche in the underworld, walking through that piece about beauty, getting to know the self around those themes. They're still valuable. The self needs to know that if it's going on that journey. So I don't judge it one way or another. I just think it lines up. All right. So him spending time on media such as GQ and all the fashion houses stuff that he's been doing since the promo tour, coming back from the promo tour, that's where we've seen him spending time and where we have visibility to him. It all is a part of his journey. So I welcome seeing what he's doing, but it's kind of interesting to see where will he pick up from there. What other projects that we not know yet that he's definitely maybe having a chance to view, but I'm sure it depends on commitments to Bridgerton season 4 and the schedule that is being given to them, what he might pick up on or not. So there's something to that. But that south node is in her fifth house. We see this kind of combination between his north node is in his fifth house, but his south node is in her fifth house. So there's kind of this interesting connection to fifth house themes. And fifth house is for Nicola, it is Gemini. And so Gemini is her Mercury. So we look at her Mercury, and Mercury is right next to the sun. It kind of folds into this combination of how it will get picked up by the planets that are in Nicola's 12th house of the unconscious mind, but tapping into Luke's transpersonal planets, meaning it will go in a direction that is not in the status quo. It will have a definition to it that's really high imagination and having it brought down to earth for the creativity of it. But there will be elements that are unexpected because that's the Uranus. It will break through old paradigms. Right. So there's something to that. But that means that there's also this breakthrough that's happening in connection to these two for her own creative and her way of how she looks up. That she has the woundedness around having the facts that she needed, or the support for facts or something in her creative work. But she's also, there's two sides to the Chiron, and is, how smart and intelligence. Think about in her character how important it is that Penelope is one of the smartest in the ton, at least in terms of the book. How I know the character, they didn't do it so much in the show with Lady Danbury having a connection with Penelope, but in the books that was like a really kind of key thing I picked up on, was how intelligent she is, Penelope, and Lady Danbury is very attuned to that and loves that about her and that connection. But in the show, they kind of didn't put so much on that relationship. They focused on different things, but it's still kind of in there about how, and I think with Luke mentioning, I think when he's giving her the engagement ring, he meant, and he's trying to figure out who Lady Whistledown is, that he was thinking that she might be more intelligent, something like that. So it's still picked up on in the show, but I think that's interesting that in her chart, we have the Gemini is something that has a wound underneath it, but this can be not having the right words at the right time for something creatively, or, the idea that you're not smart enough for something. And that's in the fifth house of creative, what you might create, children, and these kinds of things. It can also speak to children and the experience with children and being separated from the children in some way by an authority figure in a past. That could be the more tragic story of this disconnection with the children. So that may carry out in some themes that she might do in some other shows. I don't know. There's something to me in that Chiron, and you have the Black Moon Lilith in her chart so close to that. There's to me like a dark shadow of the feminine being suppressed and then enraged by something that happens around children and her connection with that, and traditional frame of, the wife and the husband and their roles as parents and what the husband would get. I mean, think about the role that we see in Bridgerton around the Viscount. The Viscount, role, but when the father dies, it goes to the his son, and then the Viscount has the responsibility of saying what happens to his mother who's pregnant with Hyacinth, and what's happening when she's trying to deliver Hyacinth. So it's kind of an interesting thing to explore these, just loosely pull the threads on. There's a positive that I look at, but I look at both positive and negative, yin and yang energy that is in something. So the seed of a Chiron in Gemini, and then I look, where's that Mercury? Well, it's in Capricorn with a more stoic, logical, chronological. We go by the status quo of what's going on in the culture, the community, whatnot. We follow the rules. And yet her current incarnate life is like, that's in the subconscious mind. That's not lined. This life, you're going to be breaking the rules. And in her character, breaking the rules. Colin breaking the rules often. They're both breaking the rules quite often. They have certain boundaries that they're trying to live up to, but they're often breaking the rules. And they were like, wow. And people explore, I mean, of course, it's just a show, but to me, it's like, this is kind of something that mixes the soul having an experience around it, even if it's played out in a show like this, and how the person, lives and breathes their character. I mean, look how Luke, there I flip him sometimes. Look how Luke talks about playing Colin and how he'll miss playing Colin day in, day out, and what that means. That's interesting. I can't help it because but that's what they present to us, right? So his south node on her Chiron tells me that there's an interesting connection to a wound around pleasure, around children, around creativity. So is there the potential for here's like scenarios that could play. He has a Mercury in Aquarius who has a fixed idea about something, fixed way of doing it. And it's square Pluto, which has a lot of power and control, obsessiveness about it. So we could almost look at it from creatively, if he plays out a jealousy from a professional, they've called it professional jealousy, whatever the heck that means. Does that mean that they are acknowledging that Penelope and Colin have had to work out their jealousy, or he had to work out his jealousy issues? Maybe. But maybe it goes beyond that. Like, are they picking up on themes that have happened and transpired in another life story that have similar threads, and this is just a way to act it out and have it visible and see it on the screen and go, huh? And then what would I do differently? And have them, because when they are watching themselves, they interject about what they think about a particular way that their characters are playing out something. Especially Luke, he has a strong opinion about how Colin is behaving in certain scenes, or how he's acted out, or pay attention to what's right in front of you, bro. I mean, it's so funny how it works out when he's sharing those insights. But to me, that past life scenario is definitely like, are you working something out, but you're working it out on the screen? You're working it out through the easier way of maybe dissecting it and analyzing it by looking at it as a character. But I think it goes beyond that. I still think there is something the soul has to learn, because he is dissecting it and she is dissecting it, but I think he dissects. No, they both do. They both do it in their own unique ways, because I've heard them both talk about how they look at characters. How she creates her characters and gets into them and builds a structure, and starting with their voices and trying to find their voice and how that should be played. But it's also kind of how the subtlety can come on the emotion of the face, and that's Colin. So it's him and how he communicates with very subtle, nuanced expressions. And that is because he's playing off his co-lead. So he's acting out something because it's playing off the other lead. In this case, it's Nicola, and how that then translates. But then it's him dissecting it and analyzing it, like how he's going to do that. And that would be his art. It's not just art. It's something that his soul is needing to go through to understand himself as a soul about, what's my opinion on that? Why do I think that way? What are my thoughts on that thing? And it's just what I call a softer playing field than maybe having to acknowledge it in real life, because in real life there can be a block to get like, oh, I'm behaving in this way or that way. And when do you step into your own wisdom? Like the wisdom of experience. Right? And the wisdom of experience, at least from me, I'm 54 years old now, going on later this year, I'll turn 55 in December. It is about you mature so much, especially in your 30s, about certain things in your life. And I think there's something in astrology about when you turn 36, because there's something in the timing, because you're coming to your second nodal return. There's a maturing of your storyline, and you really can start to see things. And then you're going to have, shortly after that, within a few years, you'll go into your Uranus opposition, which is the midlife crisis. So there's almost like a moment of, I'm pretty sure I know who I am with my feet on the ground. And I know that through all this experience, and you kind of show up that way in your maturity. You may have made mistakes from what you intended on, and it went this way or that way or whatever. Yeah, we can judge ourselves harshly on things, but I think it's more the value of kind of having that ability to have that reflective moment of how far you come and then what you've come into, because that's it's almost like that moment when you're 36, that year that you see the maturity, and where it can progress from there, because from a traditional astrology standpoint, when you're 36, not only do you have your nodal return, your second one, but you have a first house annual perfection. And so that kind of the ascendant, what the mask is now going to show us, what the person is, okay, I've matured to this point and I can express this now. And it's a little bit more interesting. Like if you're 36 or older, consider looking back and reflecting on the year that you were turning, 35 to 36, and think of, what was maturing in the year that you're 36. It's really interesting. time. Okay. What else do I want to point out? Yeah. So in terms of their synastry also, that I don't think a lot of people point out, is the nodes for one to the nodes for the other are just by sextile. So they're not like squaring each other. So they're activating each other, but not, when I see sextiles, it's more like it's activating things. I can see there's a point of reference between planets anyway, but I think when I look at the outer planet combinations and I think of some of the things that were happening this year in transits with the total solar eclipse at 19 of Aries, which would be here, this was such a huge year for both of them. Luke for the Venus progression to 19 of Aries, so it's getting like that blip of the separation kind of thing going on, which then that impacts his career and his relationships and his Jupiter. But for her, when that also activates that square between his transpersonal planets that are sitting in her, it's activating something in her unconscious mind to her sun. So her identity is tied into that kind of blip a little bit, which we see because people are questioning why, that the connection or the disconnect from the show and then reality and then that other, kind of other relationships in the life and what's going on. People are like trying to speculate what they're very private people, so they're probably trying to hide certain things. Of course, I would too. But I think it's more important that it's taken into consideration that the timing, the divine timing is the souls. It's on track, doing exactly what the astrology would indicate would be a separation of sorts. Still friends, but how dynamic that friendship is while they're separated, not filming together, right? Like there's definitely kind of a pause, but there's this activation that's happened on her nodal structure because that total solar eclipse was right next to her node. So to me, this is a really changing moment for her with the total solar eclipse on her node, her north node. So her vision and her instincts were probably caught off guard. And so we could look back on the promo tour of there could have been a moment that her instincts were caught off guard anywhere around that total eclipse. So it could have been before, but it could have been after. But to me, the spot of a total solar eclipse, if it's really directly on something in the chart, that's numero uno. But if it's close to something within a couple of degrees, it's still dynamic. And that was 3 degrees close to her north node. So that then means it's also opposite her south node. So both are being activated fairly close, and the node also then squares off on all that energy to her sun. So the total solar eclipse has this blip for her in terms of something out of the unconscious mind that's always been sitting there, even though it's the progressed sun into Aquarius. But it's kind of like the first, I guess, the impulse of the trajectory something was going. Right. And then you have this kind of blip of the total solar eclipse does have that separating aspect to it. It does kind of take it in a direction that was not easily foreseen without having something like astrology. Oh, that's going to hit my chart in a particular way. Not having that, you're going to go through something that stimulates your unconscious mind and stimulates the arc of your life and respect. And that's on her, but for him, it's the Venus. So there's a whole kind of exploration of career, his own passion, what makes him feel loved, lovable, and how he extends that. That's his own Venus. And a man will project onto, if he's heterosexual, onto his partner, female partner, the Venus in a lot of ways. So it gets picked up by someone else or different things get played out, right? So, but if there's the disconnect on instinctual, so here's what I'm thinking about the instincts. Imagine being an actor and you're in the mode of being directed to do a scene. Think of all the scenes they had to do for season 3. Think of all the scenes that they had to talk about and discuss how they were going to do them, and going and getting the right emotional tone or expressions and all the things. How many times they had to dissect that detail to create something. Now, we've seen it again and again in the celebrity landscape of couples coming together after they've played co-leads on something that was highly sensual or whatnot. It would be very difficult probably to separate that experience in your mind. But I think total solar eclipse in this instant did separate that. And I think that helps probably to some degree continue being an individual, but instincts, the instinctual nature underneath it all, Aries had a disrupting factor in 2024. So, and hitting the trajectory that someone might be learning about their instincts, might come under a moment of, okay, think about your instinct. When you're not, if you haven't had anything to drink or had any other kind of substance that would blur your instincts, they're there to protect you. You have your instincts to act very directly on something, and that's there to protect you in the case of, trying to escape, get away from something that could hurt you, right? Or that's just from our primal brain, right? But imagine that your instincts have been registering something for many, many months because you've been playing a part and playing a part and playing a part. And some of it, like, how much does the mind have it as, it's forming some kind of attachment, right? There still could be attachment, but there is a bit of a reset button with the total solar eclipse on the instinctual nature for Luke's Venus. So he has it going through the labyrinth of his own to reconnect and understand that. For her, it's like the moon's trajectory of experience around how do I communicate? What's my perception of something? And isn't it interesting that in the promos that they had when they did they had the paddles and they were talking about love or friend zone. And she was talking about, if you call me bro, pal, whatever, don't kiss me on the lips if you call me bro or pal or what. I love that. It was so funny. But she also is like, there's something about don't sending a mixed message. And I think I think there was something really true to that. And she was like, this sends this message. There was something to that. And I think that was in Italy though. That was wasn't Italy before Brazil? Because Brazil had a little thing, I'm sure, that probably put a lot of energy on something, but we'll discuss that later. I think that friend zone, love zone interview promo tour was in Italy by the clothing that they were wearing and whatnot. But I think it's important to kind of keep in mind that we have astrology and we look at the planets and people say, oh, it's causal, that this thing caused this or it's not. It's synchronistic of what's going on in an individual. And so when we have, and we're participating in something that we're in the energy, our bodies are connected to and sensitive to our natal chart. The first moment we took an in-breath, that's in our unconscious mind. That's in the display of, and all the things that seed of potential, your whole seed of potential. But we have to look at the timing of something. It's like, it's the divine timing of everything coming together in a particular moment that created this combination of things that could live and manifest and have, our interaction with it. And so when we see the progressed Venus for Coughlan, that was the divine for him, right? For him to have this disconnect, for like, you've got to have, some more internal exploration, reflection, so you understand what is transpiring with this kind of Venus getting completely eclipsed by the sun in a total eclipse, like going into the void, right? And yet at the same time, because he was so connected to Nicola and our perception of it, now there's a lot of perception here, and how it hits her own north node within 3 degrees, not exact, but within 3 degrees. And then that then gives us like a perception of what her instinctual nature could have been related to that as well. And then it ties into her own moon of how things kind of transpired during the tour, and then having the eclipse, and then her having experience of having Luke with her in Galway, meeting her mother, the base of her chart, her home, her moon involved here. So there's this weird, I shouldn't say weird, but it's a dynamic of timing that we get the eclipse, and then we still have all the tour transpiring, all the things that they're still getting an information and experience and their friendship, and then having the ending as it was to be ended as they closed out that tour, and then the kind of where they go from here. So there's this huge kind of blank slate, like almost blank slate, still have friendship, but some things have been added to change the dynamic. And we can see that, and we've all been discussing that as, side on the sides. But I think it's important to note the instinctual and the arc of the life that has a moment of like, for Nicola on the total solar eclipse. And then the moon, wherever it was in her progressions at that time, was very important. So we'd have to go back to the progressions for Nicola on April 8th, and even where they are now. I have another chart for them where they are now. I can go that in a minute, but I want to kind of pull that out and point that out.